everyone, welcome to Survive This Crit, where we combine our love for horror movies and RPGs to take an adventure into some of the universes of our most famous monsters. I'm your final girl, Kylie.
And I'm your final guy, Nick.
Hello, welcome back to the second episode of Nightmare on Elm Street. Today we're going to be starting with Letterboxd reviews. So if you guys are not familiar with Letterboxd, it's a fairly young app. It's not been around for too long to see how films hold up against modern audiences. I feel like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb are amazing, but they're usually critics. And Letterboxd is a platform for fellow film lovers like you and me. So you can follow me on Letterboxd. I'll include my @ below in the comments section. And Nick, do you want to guess what the average rating was?
Okay, so considering in our previous episode we were just talking about the Rotten Tomatoes score, I'm going to aim a little bit higher this time. I'm going to say it's ranked 4 out of 5.
That is really close. It's a 3.8. Do you want to hear some of the reviews?
Okay, let's hear them.
Okay, so some of the best reviews were, "Dear God, I wouldn't last 10 minutes in this universe. Sleeping is literally one of my hobbies," from Marmar. "I guess you could say they need to stay woke," from Owen.
Oh, okay.
"People with insomnia watching this. LOL. James."
Like,
So those
people
are,
with insomnia are probably looking at saying, "Lol, I'm the one that survives.
yeah,
Everyone else sucks."
@ Nancy. So you have a new segment to introduce here. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah. Okay, so in order to challenge our trivia brains and see how well we were both paying attention to our sources, we will be doing a segment or a game we call Monster Movie Trivia. That name's a placeholder for now. So the way this game works is I've devised 10 trivia questions for Kylie, and she will only get 3 opportunities to get these questions wrong. She has to try and get as many questions answered correctly as possible. If she gets more than 3 questions wrong, she will be quote unquote killed by Freddy Krueger himself.
No.
And every question she gets wrong is considered a slash to the body by one of Freddy Krueger's fingers. Just to let our listeners know, if there's any debate you want to have amongst the answers to the questions, whether or not what we consider to be the right answer, if you have any type of argument against that, please feel free to leave in the comments below. We always love to learn more. So feel free to correct us if we're wrong.
We're movie fans, not movie experts.
Very true. So Kylie, are you ready?
I'm scared, but I'm ready.
That's okay. Most of these, I feel like you're pretty prepared for since we came in with the same resources. Question 1. What gave Wes Craven the inspiration for Nightmare on Elm Street?
I believe it was a series of articles that came out in the LA Times about the Khmer Rouge refugees who had relocated to the United States. A lot of them were having dreams and were dying in their dreams. There were 3 reported articles about people who had died in their dreams.
That is correct. There are people dying in their dreams, as you said, and Wes Craven read that and thought, what an interesting concept. We should make a movie out of that. I believe one of the famous quotes is something along the lines of, these parents are being quoted in the article of one of the children who died, stating that the child was telling them that whatever it was that was chasing him in his dreams, if we let it capture him, it would kill him. And one night they found him screaming in his bed, and that's when that specific child had passed. So
yeah. He also, as like a side note, that particular kid was keeping a coffee pot in his closet, I believe, which was the inspiration for Nancy having a coffee pot in her room during the movie.
Oh yeah, I noticed that. Second question, which film production studio did this movie kick off?
New Line Cinema, which is also known as The House That Freddy Built, because it was their first movie that the production company ever made. They were
That's
previously
correct.
distributors of B&C movies, to clarify. It wasn't like the first time they had done anything ever, but they were previously distributors.
And so it's just crazy to think, like, I remember so many movies that I watched as a kid from the line cinema, and to think that it was built on Nightmare on Elm Street built that house was
Yeah.
pretty interesting. Next question. What series did Robert Englund star in before he became Fred Krueger?
Is it called V? Like the letter?
That's right.
It was like a alien sci-fi kind of series, right? That was like the first thing that kind of brought him to fame.
Yes. Fourth question. How much money did Nightmare on Elm Street gross overall?
The overall gross, it was 57 million, right? Or are you talking about all 9 movies? Because all 9
No,
movies.
no. We're just talking about the first movie right now.
Okay, the first movie I believe was 57 million overall.
That is correct.
Okay.
Doing good so far. 4 for 4.
You paused for a long enough time that I really thought I was wrong. So you're doing a good job at making me sweat.
Okay. Where did Wes Craven come up with the name for Fred Krueger?
Freddy Krueger is based off of the name of a bully that bullied Wes Craven as a child, which honestly is the best form of revenge. But Krueger is also inspired, the last name is inspired by World War II.
I don't know if I should ding you for this one or not, because you are right. You did get the part I was specifically looking for, which was that he named Fred Krueger based off of a bully he had. However, I believe the way you were saying it, the word his first name Fred was only based off the bully, and
And
you come up
Krug
with
was
the next
based
part.
off of the, yeah.
But you're saying the last name Krueger was based off of something else, and I believe it was the whole name. Wes Craven actually decided to just take the whole name, do a Ted Mosby from How I Met Your Mother style type of revenge in this movie.
Okay, darn.
You
I will
get
consider a slash on that one. You can go ahead and slash me.
you just been slashed. I'm sorry. That's just how it
Oh,
is.
gosh.
Which horror movies had Wes Craven worked on before Nightmare on Elm Street? Specifically, to help give you a hint, there were 2 films in particular.
I ironically have my notes pulled up and I only would have gotten one of them right from memory. So I will put full honesty there. The Last House on the Left was his first horror film. The Hills Have Eyes is the second one.
That is correct. Don't
But
know
I
why
only
paused
I
there.
only knew one of them from memory. I do happen to have my notes up, so I'm gonna move my note tab so I don't see them anymore.
Okay. Don't worry, we'll still keep all your other right answers.
Okay.
We'll give you credit for those.
I wasn't looking at the answers for the other ones, I promise.
Okay. Question number 7. How many sequels are there in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise?
I believe there are 8 total movies, but there's a couple that cross over with Jason, so I don't know if those are counted as sequels. Or there's 9 total movies, 8 sequels.
The total number of movies in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise,
Total.
including Wes Craven's A New Nightmare, which I believe counts in this case, considering it does involve Fred Krueger. The total number is 9, meaning the number of sequels is 8. So I believe you said 8?
I believe I did. Yeah.
Okay. So then you had that one correct as well. Congratulations. So that puts you at 7 correct answers. So you will survive this, but do you want to continue on?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to see if I'm smart enough.
Here's another one that could be up for debate, but how many actors in the movie had established movie careers going into this?
I believe there were only 2 previously well-established actors in the film, those being Ronnie Blakely and John Saxon.
You are correct, actually. Marge Thompson, played by Ronnie Blakely, and John Saxon, playing Lieutenant Thompson, were the only 2 actors with previous careers.
Cool. Okay. So go ahead. Keep going.
Okay. We'll try and speed up these last 2 here. Ready?
Okay.
How many alternate endings did Bob Shea have?
I don't remember for sure. I want to say it was 5.
So, considering that a couple of the different alternate endings were all kind of mashed together a little bit, I remember specifically there was only a couple little finite details with the car ending, and then There were one of the endings I remember specifically being Nancy's mom being dragged through the door. Those were considered distinct endings, and then they kind of got mashed together at the end of the final product. Considering those facts, we will throw this question out because it seems a little too much up to debate here.
Okay.
So we'll say you pass this one.
Yes.
So the producer, Bob Shea, what was his previous job before producing this movie?
He was a film distributor. So he would take like B and C list films to like college campuses and stuff.
Yeah, I believe he was compared to something like a drug dealer, sort of,
But for film.
or rather
clarified. But for film and not adult films, just film.
Kylie, you have successfully survived. Freddy Krueger did not kill you today.
I did get slashed once.
You came out there a little scraped, but you came out clean.
I came out the final girl, and that's all I want to be. Okay.
Well, I thought it might be a good idea to maybe talk about our own feelings towards the films or towards the first film in general.
Cool. We can talk about our opinions before I deep dive. That's totally fine.
Do you have any specific memories related to this movie? Anything in particular that you really liked or hated?
Okay. So this was actually one of the first, I think, official horror movies I saw. My freshman year of college, I had a group of friends that was a mixture of actors and filmmakers. And Nightmare on Elm Street was one of the ones that we watched during spooky season. That was one of the first films for me that was horror, and I was definitely fascinated with it. I still find the song eerie, the like 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. That whole song, I absolutely hate it. I feel like they did a great job with that, and I love it. I think it's nostalgic for me because it was one of the first horror films for me. And then I remember I actually found a Freddy Krueger sweater at a thrift store in Oklahoma City when I was living there. So I actually had a Freddy Krueger sweater that I would wear around Halloween time for a couple of years. I think in the end, the collar got frayed and I had to get rid of it. But I did have like the classic red and green striped sweater. And if you can see in my background, I actually have a Freddy Krueger blanket over here in the corner. So what about you? What are your general like thoughts and opinions about this film?
Well, it's actually very funny. You mentioned it being your first official horror film. I technically consider this one to also be my first official horror film.
Oh my gosh,
this was my gateway movie. So to give a little bit more background on that, as a kid growing up, I was completely horrified of the idea of horror films in general. I remember being like 5 or maybe it was 7, and I had a cousin who was a little bit older than me, and she would put on some horror films, and I would just stay clear of the room all the time. Like, no, that's not for me. I can't. I absolutely cannot. And then growing up, so it depends on your view of the thriller subgenre in general. But technically, I want to say my very first, like any type of movie with horror involved, was actually Disturbia with Shia LaBeouf. And but like I said, I consider that to be more of a thriller and a little bit more distinct. So that's what kind of worked up my courage a bit. I saw Disturbia, and I was like, you know what? Actually, I kind of enjoyed this. This was fun. But the next movie, definitely, I remember, was Nightmare on Elm Street, and I remember it distinctly. I remember first seeing the cover art for it on Netflix.
The cover art is scary. Like, am I the only one that thinks it's kind of jarring?
You know, I kind of thought of that at first, and then I looked at it again today, right before we started recording, and I was like, "This is actually kind of funny. This almost looks nothing like the movie in a sense. I mean, it kind of looks like Nancy, but it kind of looks like Nancy with almost like someone did something to her face that made it look like it was some type of modern art reimagining, and what I believe is supposed to be Freddy Krueger in the cover art looks nothing like Freddy Krueger. He definitely has the glove, which makes me believe it's Freddy Krueger. Yeah, anyway.
3 hours later.
I was just flipping through Netflix and I happened to see it and I was like, okay, Nick, you got this. You can watch this movie. And I did. And I fell in love with it. And I was like, this is amazing. I loved the whole idea of a guy who could just come into your dreams and attack you. As weird as that sounds, I appreciated the originality.
What's your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie?
Favorite one? Well, the first one will obviously have a warm place in my heart. The remake, I don't want to say it was the best. It's definitely not, but I think it has its own merits to go on to try and make the movie a little bit more serious. And I thought it'd just be worth mentioning that.
Okay.
I think so. I'm gonna go off of instinct here and say that my favorite is probably whichever one is titled The Dream Warriors.
That one's my favorite too.
And I gotta say, but the thing I distinctly remember about Dream Warriors was the fact that it kind of went back to what seemed like a similar formula with the first movie. With these movies kind of started out
Right.
with the clumsy female characters who
Yeah,
were
it
constantly
wasn't-
fearful of running away.
That was like some of Wes Craven's previous films where he had like the female falling and like making dumb mistakes, but his daughter actually was the one that was like, Dad, you can't keep doing that. And I think that is where like the strong character of Nancy came to life, where she is smart and she's determined and she's a problem solver. She doesn't need anybody to fix her problems. She's gonna save everybody and herself. Speaking of that, do you want to dive into Wes Craven, the production company, some like quick, fast facts, what was happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we're going to do a deep dive on, so the sources that I used are available public domain. Like there, if you have a Netflix account, you can watch The Movies That Made Us. Season 3, episode 3 covers Nightmare on Elm Street, as well as the Never Sleep Again documentary, which is from New Line Home Entertainment. Let's talk about Wes Craven because we were just talking about him. So he does get majority of the credit because he was the director and writer. But Bob Shea was the one who believed in him and gave him a chance. Because Wes Craven had written the script, his agent was pushing it around to different markets and nobody was buying it. Bob Shea saw the potential behind it and he was the one that was like, okay, let's make this. But I have to describe how Wes Craven was described by his colleagues, because unlike Alfred Hitchcock, who was known for potentially being more tormenting to his actors on set, Wes Craven, for being a horror director and writer, he was described as a college professor, a philosopher, and a mad scientist. And even Ronnie Blakely described him as being soft and eloquent, like a soft-spoken man.
One thing that kind of like reminded me of you specifically was talking about he had the strong religious background and his parents never let him watch horror films. And I was just like, that sounds like Kylie.
I actually do have a backstory behind that. So my mom grew up watching like the Alfred Hitchcock classics. The Birds petrifies her to this day. That was a big reason why she didn't let us watch horror growing up, because it scared her so much. She was afraid of the impact it would have on us. But you're right. Like Wes Craven had a deeply religious background. He wasn't allowed to watch any movies, which is very different from the background I grew up in. My parents were super chill about us watching movies. But Wes Craven also had a deeply rooted fear of his father, which I found really interesting. I feel like a lot of horror writers or filmmakers have like some unique niche that is almost based in trauma. And I feel like that's where a lot of inspiration is drawn. Wes Craven didn't actually start becoming a filmmaker until his 30s. And Wes Craven didn't even start writing until he was in college. When he was in college, he came down with unexpected paralysis and started writing poetry and short stories because he couldn't move or do anything. So he started writing. An additional note was that Wes Craven was his directing style. He was very much one who encouraged like giggling and fun on set. They did have a very short amount of time to film, as we talked about previously. Like they had 32 days to film. But the actors do remember a lot of laughter and happy memories. He wasn't forcing the actors to be like method the whole time.
That's one thing I kind of got a sense of during my research was a
Mhm.
lot of the people, not just the actors, but everyone involved. Like it just seemed like making this movie was just one huge anxiety, like just project.
But
But they all look back
fun
at it. The
anxiety.
mom, exactly, and they all look back and remember it fondly, which
Yeah.
is something I always find to be true for a lot of people. Which is, sometimes it's the things that challenge you or push you the most. You look back and you think to yourself like, this is something that really shaped my life, and
Yeah.
you have fond memories of it.
Well, I loved that sentiment. That was beautiful. Do you want to hear some of the inspiration of how the villain was created?
Yeah, was it? So we were talking about how the name of Freddy Krueger is based off of a bully
Mhm.
that Wes Craven had growing up, which is very funny. My hope is that the bully, if he ever watched the film, maybe he just looks back at that and just kind of like laughs about it too. Do you happen to know why all the burn marks and everything? What the choice was
Yes.
for that?
I do. So Wes Craven actually saw a burnt man at a very young age, and that like just created an emotional scar on him. He remembers seeing it and it being absolutely horrifying. Additionally, the hat that Freddy wears too was also inspired by an encounter that he had with a drunk man as a child. He happened to be walking down the street and walked past a drunk man who like said something to him, but he was wearing that hat. And Wes Craven remembered as a child how terrifying that was to see that particular man coming at him. Do you know why red and green were chosen for the sweater?
No, I don't actually, but I am curious to find out. I want to say, if I were to make up a reason, I want to say red has something to do with blood, but that's
I
just
mean,
me.
that would make sense. But red and green is actually, those two colors are the most difficult for the human eye to put together side to side. So it was a tactic for it to be like difficult for the audience to literally focus on the villain because it's a little more work for their eyes than most colors.
So then, what does that say about Christmas?
That we should have chosen different colors. With the next section that we can dive into, do you want to talk about the actors? Do you want to talk about the design of the film, the dramatic ending? What do you want to dive into?
Well, okay, so another thing I distinctly remember I thought was really cool. I always love hearing about struggling actors and how much like they need to invest in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for example, so many people love the Rocky movies, and one of the reasons I think so, I have this personal belief that if someone really puts their all into a movie,
Mm-hmm.
that that movie will produce a certain je ne sais quoi of just something the audience can feel helps them fall in love with the movie. It's that idea of you put your heart into what you do, people will reciprocate that feeling. What was it? The same is true for the, I might be butchering this, but Heather Langenkamp.
Oh, the actors who ended up playing Nancy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she played Nancy Thompson. I just remember hearing her saying that she was also struggling financially. She was on she was living off of $5,000 in LA. I mean, you lived in LA for a while. I grew up near
Good.
there, but not in LA. So to hear $5,000 in LA, I'm just like, wow. You maybe things were different back in the 1980s, but yeah. And she said she was basically living on a loan that her father gave her,
Oh,
which this was her last opportunity. If she
yeah.
didn't, then she would have ran out of money and she wouldn't be the actress that we know.
Well, good thing she didn't.
Knowing that this is her last chance, like just all the effort she puts into this movie was
Mhm.
just something you can clearly see.
And
And
I'm
then,
going to dive into actors just a little bit. We talked a little bit last week about Johnny Depp's specifically. Like we said, it was his first role. Wes Craven's daughter and her friends demanded that he be cast. Like he had a great look and Wes Craven was considering him, but his daughters were like, you have to cast him. He is a dreamboat. His career like kicked off from there. Johnny Depp also was initially an inspiring musician. So I believe is doing more music now as well, but I believe like his initial path to Hollywood was to be a musician. A couple more things about some of the actors on set. I really loved Robert Englund's, like how he auditioned for the role, because it is ludicrous. He actually put cigarette ash under his eyes to make them look really sunken in. And then he used dipstick smearing for his hair to slick it back so he could look extra scary. And then when he sat in the audition room, he just like stared at Wes Craven and wouldn't blink.
That's the trick for any good horror film. Never blink.
Don't blink. Don't even blink.
I think we just recently learned that with Jenny Ortega's interpretation of Wednesday Addams. I didn't watch it, but that's something I definitely heard about.
But for Robert Englund, he found out that he got cast that day. Like after he auditioned, and by the time he got home, with LA traffic, he got a call that he was cast in the role. And he actually got asked to sign on to several films, which honestly was a real baller move by Bob Shaye's production company and the whole production team and Wes Craven and the casting director, because they did not know this film was going to take off. So it's a really baller move to be like, hey, we need you to sign on for several movies to play this one character. Because, as soon as an actor has like a hit show or a hit film, you notice that they start getting cast in a lot more right away. Because now they're like a wanted commodity. They're going to bring in more audience members to watch them. So he got signed on to multiple films before the product was even made, which is pretty spectacular. I would have loved to have seen his audition tape. I had a couple more tidbits on Freddy Krueger's character himself. They were going to try to cast a stuntman. Because of the script, they were like, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that Freddy has to go through, being set on fire, for example. So they were like, maybe we should cast a stuntman for it. But the stuntman that they had come in and audition just couldn't emotionally connect with the script. Robert Englund, he's a classically trained actor, so he has more like theater. I don't know exactly what realm he studied, whether it was like Stanislavski, Chekhov, Meisner, etc. Like there's so many different schools of acting that you could study. He actually used aspects of the film Nosferatu and Jimmy Cagney, the character, for his role.
Yeah, I could see where you drew the inspiration there. My favorite character of all, I don't know, just doing a rewatch again last night. I was making Christmas cookies last night while watching this movie. And it's just interesting.
I love it. Please send me.
The thing that stuck out to me the most, for whatever reason this time around, was the character Rod Lane. Just like thinking like, when they have that sex scene, I'm just like thinking, this is why his name is Rod. I see.
Oh my God. Well, the actress Amanda, who played Tina, she actually said that was the most awkward scene to film in the entire movie.
Oh, because of the Tarzan fix Jane line or something like that?
I think because of that, and just because like it was a very loud scene that they were having leading up, before they both go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
But Rod was actually meant to be a fairly empathetic character, like the bad boy, but he has got like a good heart of gold underneath.
And I got that sense, but I also felt like the way the character was set up at the beginning was not great. If you're aiming for an empathetic character anyways. As far as like your stereotypical jock guy, I was like, oh, this guy is a hoot. He's a laugh. Yeah,
that's fair. I feel like he could have been. I will say the interesting thing throughout this film and throughout like a lot of the films too is like there are not many characters that are empathetic to what the other characters are going through, like all the characters who are targeted by Freddy. I feel like Nancy is the only one, and when she, spoiler alert here if you've not watched up to 3, when Nancy gets killed, I feel like we lose that empathy a little bit, but we could talk more about that in some of the later films.
One thing I still wanted to say actually about Rod that I just remembered too. One something that really stuck out to me, what separated him from the rest of the characters, was the fact that he seemed to be the only one who was killed while still awake. Everyone else was at least still asleep. And
That's
Freddy's
true.
interaction with the real world against him was taking that bed sheet and hanging him up.
While he
And
was
so
awake.
while he
Well,
was awake.
I think
And
Glenn woke up because if you watch the clip really closely, his eyes open and he starts freaking out as he's getting sucked into his bed. But I think like he was asleep though for the most part. But yeah, you're right. Glenn is in prison or jail. Sorry, this is a small town jail for the night as a minor. He is in jail. I assume he's a minor. I don't know. I think the script doesn't exactly specify, but they were supposed to all be like.
He doesn't
15.
look like a minor, but
He doesn't.
Probably is. What was it? The thing that really just stuck out to me though about all that was the fact that, as you were kind of hitting on, he was struggling, and watching him slowly get dragged up by that bed sheet, that was the one moment where I was like, "What are you doing?" Because I'm just growing up doing a few different fighting sports in general. One thing I don't remember everything about what I learned doing like karate and things like that, but one thing I definitely remember was if you're getting choked out by someone, you gotta stick your fingers in between whatever's trying to choke you and your neck, so you can make just enough room to kind of slide your chin down in there. And I'm just like the whole time I'm like wondering like, okay, so he's getting hung, so he's got that against him. We'll give him that. But why aren't you trying to do that first?
Yeah.
And maybe not everyone like learns that, but having that background, I was kind of like, what are you doing? You fool! Everyone else didn't have a chance, but you do.
When he was the notorious bad boy and troublemaker too, so you would have thought that he would have been able to fight for himself a little bit better. But I do have a couple more tidbits on, because we could dive into the actors and every aspect of this forever, but I'm going to dive into the design of the film because it is pretty unique the more that I dived into it. So Jim Doyle was the designer for this film, and he was willing to work for a really, really low budget. So the budget that they had for special effects was $57,000. So here's some of the things that he did with that money, which is actually really impressive. So just for context, like there were 80 special effects shots out of a 90 shot film. So almost all of the movie was special effects in one way or another. And that being said, every effect was not special. It was a practical special effect, which means it was not used with CGI. It was all made physically. So for example, Jim Doyle was the creator of the razor gloves. Jim Doyle was given the direction by Wes Craven to, hey, create something that you would find in like a boiler room. But that was like the only direction he had. He made a bunch of like 5 copies of these gloves that were used. A lot of them were sharp and some were actually plastic, but
I heard about how he cut himself the first time
he did.
ever
He was playing with them.
The glove.
Another cool thing that he did, Jim Doyle, is he actually created a room that could rotate upside down.
Oh,
so
yeah,
he
that was
had
the Tina scene, correct?
Yeah, so it was actually used for 2 scenes. So it was used for Tina's death as well as Glenn's. They redecorated the room so they could use it again, but he created a room
So that was the same room. Okay.
Yeah, it was the same room. That room was actually cranked manually with a hand turn wheel, and they had to I don't know, get the furniture to stay even when it would rotate, and it actually gave a lot of the actors vertigo and issues while they were filming those scenes. The ceiling was the floor and the floor was the ceiling, and she was kind of freaking out during that, which I don't blame her. I totally would be too. But a fun fact too is, so when blood spurted up, that was actually, it was spurting down, and it actually hit an actual electric panel. You can see it hit a light, and that actually electrocuted a couple crew members who were controlling the water on the other end.
I heard about that.
Yeah.
That's another example, one of those things where it's like, wow, to put that much of your body, like to hurt yourself in that sense for
Oh
your
yeah.
art. Like you can see that.
I feel like
You gotta
today's
do it for that.
sets are usually a lot safer and wouldn't allow something like that to happen on average, but this was guerrilla filmmaking. They were making with what they had and the time span they had. A couple of the other really notable effects that I found was when Freddy's arms stretch in the alley.
When I was watching it last night, I laughed at that scene. I was just like, I was looking at it, seeing it again as an adult. I'm like, oh my goodness, if my worst nightmare came to me looking like that, I would
You
have
probably
no
laugh.
fear towards it. I would just laugh at it.
But I mean, for the time, it was scary. And the fact that they were able to do it with such a small budget, like they had a couple of fake arms that were a little longer attached to Robert England, but like it was just two dudes on garages on either side that had fishing poles, and they just reeled in the arms. The other thing too that I really, really admired was, there are two that I really liked because I know we're a little short on time, was there was actually spandex wall paneling against the regular wall for when Freddy is coming through the wall toward Nancy.
I've always wondered about that effect. And
Yeah.
so
It was
I
just,
noticed that again last night, and I was just thinking to myself, like, how do they do that? So it's spandex. Okay.
I think what Jim Doyle said in the documentary, this is the Never Sleep Again documentary, he, I think, said it was like 10 cents per yard. So they bought, like, it was a really cheap prop that worked really, really well.
If I might chime in here with one scene or one effect I really liked, it was the Movies That Made Us documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing about the stuntman that was on fire, that one made my, that I want to applaud when I heard that story
Oh
of
my gosh.
just having the guy be told, okay, you're just gonna chase her to the stairs, and when you reach the foot of the stairs, just hit the ground. And apparently that's like the de facto safe word in the movie industry for put the fire out, please.
Yeah.
And the fact that he actually chased her up the stairs and then fall down the stairs, but then went right back up the stairs again and then fell. The fact that he was willing to put himself through that, oh my goodness.
Well, the stuntman, his name was Tony Caesar, and his specialty was actually being like lit on fire and doing fire stunts, which is just wild. Imagine going home for Thanksgiving and being like, yeah, my job is being lit on fire for camera. People really like it when I get lit on fire.
Okay, and as the guy at the party, I'd talk to you and just be like, please tell me more. I have a desk job, so please tell me what it's like to,
I will add one more quick interesting scene, behind the scenes detail, and then I'll dive into locations real quick and the drama of the ending, because there was a lot of drama behind creating the ending. So the last special effect that Jim Doyle brilliantly came up with, which was beautiful, was the bathtub scene when Nancy is falling asleep. The hand that actually comes up to Nancy is actually Jim Doyle's hand. And what he did was he would hide underwater, he would hold his breath, and then come up with the hand. And they actually put a hole in the tub and built a tank underneath so he could sit comfortably in the tank and then have his hand come out and then breathe, of course, in between takes.
When I first heard about that scene, that just gave me cringe thoughts. I was like, man, I would not be comfortable sitting in a bathtub watching some guy. So, I mean, I assume she had like a swimsuit on or something, but still, to just like be sitting in a tub, having some guy just like filming you like that. I can't speak as far as women, but like as a guy, still, I'd be like, privacy, please. Can we not? But that just explains why I can't be an actor.
From the actor perspective, I do appreciate like the line that they went to for the craft. Absolutely. And I think it would be one of those scenes that would be weird, but from watching some of the behind the scenes videos on it in the Never Sleep Again documentary, it was actually pretty funny. I think they both made like the best of it. So as for locations, they did have a studio that they filmed at, the interior of the house and the interior of the room that they used for when Tina died, and for when Glenn died, his room. as well as the interior of Nancy's house, was all built in the Desilu Studios. And I may have gotten that name, I may have pronounced it incorrectly. There's a street on West Hollywood that is where the actual exterior of the house was, where a lot of stuff was filmed. And Glenn's house was actually across the street, which is really cool. Because normally with locations, like if you have a house across the street, they usually end up faking it. They usually don't actually use a house across the street. So it's really cool that they actually used one directly across the street.
And the other location was the boiler room, which was actually an abandoned prison, which when I first heard about that, I was just thinking to myself, like, there's at least a few other horror movies where I know like they do something like that. They find an abandoned building.
Well, you're right. Like the boiler room scenes were filmed in the Lincoln Heights jail. And then the only other locations point was Venice. They went and filmed in Venice for the back alley shots with Tina in some of her dreams in the beginning. So to dive in briefly to the ending of the film, to provide a little bit of context, Bob Shaye, the producer, was just getting started in his career. And we could talk for hours just about this film, honestly, but for sake of time, we won't expose you to that. But he birthed a new studio, New Line Cinema, which has done The Conjuring, It, Lord of the Rings, Hairspray, Sex and the City films, and like so much more. So they initially agreed to fund just over $1 million, which they actually did not have. So they went off searching for people to fund their project. Financing fell apart quickly after they had started filming. So they had to beg the team to stay on. And one of the associate producers, John Burrow, actually funded $9,000 of its own money to keep some of the crew aboard, because most of the crew were like, yeah, we'll work a couple weeks without pay. But John Burrow convinced the few that were not willing to work without pay with $9,000 to keep them on board. So Media Home Entertainment helped fund the rest of the film, and that's when the budget jumped to 1.2. But the interesting part about the ending, as we dive in here, so Bob Shaye organized a screening for Paramount to try and buy it. The editor had to edit the film live during the Paramount screening to include the mother getting pulled from the door, which was Bob Shaye's like preferred ending to the film, which is the ending that we see today on film. And that being said, Wes Craven did not agree with the ending. They actually disagreed a lot throughout the process of this film creatively. Like there were certain scenes, like Bob Shaye actually directed a scene, which is when Nancy runs up the stairs and she starts sinking in them, because that was based off of a nightmare that Bob Shaye had. The film endings that were different, Wes Craven wanted to see the kids drive off and pan to like the little kids playing with like 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, doing the jump rope thing. Mm-hmm. But Bob Shaye wanted more of a commercial ending to show that there was going to be a sequel. So he wanted Freddy to still be there, so that way the solution wasn't fully resolved. So that's how they shot a bunch of different options. Wes Craven personally hated, according to the Netflix documentary, the scene with the mom being pulled through the door at the end. And poor Rick Shane, who was the editor, had to deal with both Bob Shaye and Wes Craven trying to argue and discuss what ending was going to be best. But quite literally, during the Paramount premiere, they had to pause the movie for a few minutes so they could get the film reel of the mom going through the door, tack it on to the end, and then keep playing to the end.
Honestly, hearing about it, a big mistake, in my opinion, on Bob Shaye's part. The mom getting dragged through the door was interesting, but given what technology they had available and what budget they had, it just did not look good. What was it? You were saying Bob Shaye was the one, though, arguing that there had to be an unresolved conflict to it. And I can agree with that.
Well, Wes Craven wanted to do like a very subtle note toward Freddy with the little girls playing at the end. But Bob Shaye wanted it to be more commercial, more obvious. Like one of the other possible endings was like part of the car would turn into Freddy's razor blades, stuff like that. So
and the other part of the ending we haven't quite touched on was Nancy getting into the car with all her friends. And we've already seen all her friends be killed. So if I may give an attempt
Mhm.
to resolve this conflict, I think we get rid of the mom scene altogether.
Mhm.
She's just standing at the door, smiling, acting like the dumb parent that most of these movies have them be, anyways. Pretend like everything's all fine. I think Nancy had the right reaction,
Mm.
especially when the hood of Glenn's car pops up and we see that red and green. A
Yeah.
suggestion again that Freddy is there. What you
Mm.
were kind of talking about with the razor claws and everything, that could have worked. I think that could have worked. And we
Well,
want that. We want that whole sense that Freddy is still perfectly alive, especially if she drives off with her friends. If she's
Mhm.
driving off with her friends and we already seen them die, you got to realize, oh no, she's still in a dream or something,
yeah.
because
Well,
those friends should still be dead.
I will add on to one of the alternate endings was that when she turns to see who drives the car, it's actually Freddy. And I think that could have been an interesting ending too. But I liked the concept that she had defeated Freddy, because I think as we go into the second movie without Nancy at all, they kind of drive away the audience of like, where's Nancy? Oh no, she got. So many of them have sequels, and you never know like what characters are necessarily going to come back because of the rules of what universe they're living in.
Exactly. The people who make these movies, they do a great job of creating like this whole sense of resolving the conflict that is the monster at the end of the movie, but still keeping them alive. And because it's a hard thing to juggle.
The aspect of not knowing if the horror movie is going to be good enough to get picked up for a sequel is always a consideration. So that's why I think they create these endings that are a little bit more up for interpretation, because then you don't know for sure, like, are they alive or are they dead? Are they making this up? Like, what's actually happening in this universe? So
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant move for most horror filmmakers to be like, okay, they're dead. Ish.
Question mark.
Question mark.
That's what you want, because you want, the way I always measured a good horror film was whether or not after watching the movie, maybe I wasn't scared during the movie, but if after the movie, if or maybe like a few nights after the movie, if I have a hard time going to sleep, your movie produces that effect, you have done a good job as a horror movie.
I think there's an importance in endings that like raise a question mark, because maybe it's not necessarily the feeling of fear, but it's the feeling of uncertainty at the end. As we're wrapping up this section, though, I do want to add MPAA, the rating corporation who rates films, they had a bunch of scenes that were cut from Nightmare on Elm Street. They were cut short. They weren't totally cut because the gore and blood was way too much. So Tina's death and Glenn's death were both cut short from the original cut of the film because it was too
you're saying
gory.
there was more blood with Glenn?
Believe it or not.
I'm pretty sure it was already worse than Carrie, so I'm wondering.
How I described it to my husband after I saw it was, it's like a smoothie that explodes. It's a human smoothie.
Oh yeah, it's the blender scene is what it is.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this episode of Survive This Crit. Stay tuned for more episodes upcoming on Nightmare on Elm Street.